The raven came before dawn, as the wind howled through the Tower of the Hand. Ned Stark stood by the open window, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. The letter in his hand trembled not from cold, but from the weight of what he had just learned. Jon Arryn hadn't died of illness. He had been silenced, poisoned, and the truth he'd died for, it was worse than treason. The children were not Robert's. He had read the signs, black of hair, brown of eye, but Joffrey, blonde, cruel, and sharp-tongued like his mother. And now Varys's whisper confirmed it. Robert would kill the girl across the sea, a child with dragons in her blood. And he would marry off Sansa to Joffrey, knowing he was not even his own son. It was all unravelling. He thought of Catelyn, of his children, of Winterfell, of the North. What would Robert's rage cost? Them? What would the Lannisters do if Robert died? What would they do if he lived, and then something shifted inside him? This realm is rotting. Maybe the rot starts at the top. Ned turned slowly and looked at the sword on the wall. Ice, too large, for subtlety. This wasn't a northern battlefield, but there were other ways. Quiet ways. That evening, he met with Grand Maester Pycelle, who fumbled through his usual half-witted stories about Targaryen madness and Robert's declining health. But Ned had learned how to listen like a wolf, patiently, silently, until the prey gives itself away, and Pycelle gave it away. Robert's wine was being laced. Not enough to kill, just enough to weaken. But if someone tipped it too far, later that night, Ned walked alone into the royal chambers. Robert was asleep, snoring, a half-empty goblet in his hand. His crown lay carelessly tossed on the floor. The man he'd called brother was bloated now, both in body and temper. Once a great warrior, now a drunk king with a dying kingdom. Ned remembered the day they stormed the Red Keep, the look in Robert's eyes when he crushed Rhaegar's breastplate in with his warhammer. He had done it for Lyanna, he said, but he had never loved her. Not truly. He had loved an idea, a lie, and now Ned stood over him, silent as snowfall. The vial Varys had given him was small, a clear liquid, odourless. Maesters called it essence of nightshade. A drop would calm a man, 5 would end him. He poured it into the wine. He hesitated. Gods, he hesitated. But then he thought of Daenerys, barely a girl, and Viserys dead already. He thought of Sansa being wed to a boy born of incest. He thought of his son Robb, left to face whatever chaos came next. And Ned Stark, the man who had never broken his honour, not for love, not for war, not even for Robert himself, chose the realm, chose survival, chose betrayal. In the morning, King Robert Baratheon was found dead in his bed. The maesters blamed his heart. Too much drink, too much rage, too little time, and Lord Eddard Stark, Hand of the King, stood beside the corpse. With dry eyes and a heavy heart, he thought he was saving the kingdom, but all he had done was break it. The capital smelled different now. Not of spice or flowers, not even the rot of the flea-bottom alleys, but of fear. Whispers curled through the halls of the Red Keep like smoke from a funeral pyre. Robert Baratheon was dead, and though his body had barely cooled, the court was already splitting at the seams. Eddard Stark stood in the council chamber, his knuckles pale against the cold stone table. The others sat around him, their eyes sharp, their tongues sharper. Littlefinger was the first to speak, a tragedy, truly, but the king was not a young man. His health was failing. Yes, Ned interrupted. We all saw it. Still, Varys murmured, his voice soft as silk. So sudden. He was quite lively, only yesterday. Ned didn't look at the spider. He didn't look at any of them. His death is a wound to the realm, but we must move quickly. We cannot let the kingdom fracture. We must name a new king. He placed a sealed letter onto the table. Robert's final will. He named me protector of the realm until his rightful heir comes of age. Ah, yes, Pycelle croaked. Joffrey Baratheon. Ned looked up sharply. The boy is not his. A cold silence fell. Even Littlefinger, who usually found amusement in chaos, leaned back in his chair with a flicker of caution. You're suggesting, Pycelle began. I'm stating a fact, Ned said. Joffrey Myrcella and Tommen are not Robert's children. They are Jaime Lannisters. I have proof. I will not place a bastard, born of incest, on the Iron Throne. The doors burst open. In strode Cersei Lannister, dressed in mourning black, flanked by gold-cloaked guards. Her face was pale, but her eyes were wildfire. How dare you, she hissed. You stand there over my husband's grave and slander his children? They are not his, Ned repeated. His voice was low, steady. You know it. He knew it. Cersei's mouth curled into a bitter smile. You think you're the only one who can play this Game of Thrones, Stark? And then chaos came. By nightfall, the Red Keep was no longer Ned's to command. The gold cloaks, the city watch, had not sided with the Hand. Littlefinger had seen to that. Bribes, whispers, favours owed. Ned's northern honour was no match for southern cunning. Sansa was taken first. Ned had tried to get his daughters out quietly, through Varys's network. Arya had escaped, he hoped. But Sansa, she'd trusted the Lannisters. She had begged to stay, to marry Joffrey, to be queen. And now she was a hostage in her own chambers. They came for Ned in the black of night. Dozens of guards, blades drawn. He didn't fight. There was no point. His sword was in the north. His army, weeks away. They threw him in the dungeons beneath the Red Keep, the same cold cells where traitors had wept before their heads met steel. He sat alone, in the dark, with only the sound of dripping water and rats for company. He thought of Robert's face, purple, bloated, of Lyanna, dying in a bed of blood, of Jon Arryn, who had tried to do the right thing, of the lie he had buried, with Jon Snow's name. He had killed a king to save the kingdom, and now the kingdom would burn anyway. Up above, in the throne room, Cersei placed a crown on her son's golden curls. The boy smiled, cruel and triumphant. I am King Joffrey Baratheon, he shouted, and I command the traitor Eddard Stark be tried for treason, then executed. And far to the north, Winterfell waited for a raven that would never bring good news. The snow had started to fall early that year in Winterfell. At first it was a light dusting, just enough to kiss the rooftops white. But by the time the raven arrived, the sky was heavy with clouds, and the cold had sunk deep into the stone. Robbie, Stark held the scroll in shaking hands. His breath clouded the air. He read it once, then again, slower the second time, hoping the words would change. Eddard Stark, arrested, accused of treason, imprisoned beneath the Red Keep. King Robert is dead. Joffrey Baratheon sits the Iron Throne. Sansa Stark remains in the capital. Arya Stark's whereabouts unknown. The raven bore the seal of the crown. But Robb knew whose hand had guided its ink. Cersei's, her lies, her power. And somewhere beneath it all, the quiet truth his father would never speak. He had killed the king. Robb slammed his fist into the wooden table, sending plates clattering. Grey wind growled beside him, sensing his fury. Catelyn Stark entered then, her face drawn and pale. She had known something was coming. She always knew before the words were spoken aloud. She read the message and closed her eyes, as though bracing for a blow. They've taken your father, she whispered. And Sansa too. We need to ride south, Robb said immediately. We raise the banners, every northern house. We march on King's Landing and tear them down. You're not ready, Catelyn said, her voice tight. You're a boy, Robb. I'm the heir to Winterfell. She looked at him, not as a mother, but as a woman who had lost too much. Then you better start acting like one. By the end of the week, Ravens flew from Winterfell to every corner of the north, from the last hearth to Bear Island, from White Harbour to Carhold. The banners were raised. The wolf was on the move, but not all wolves followed the pack. In the shadow of the wall, Jon Snow stood beneath the great weirwood tree, his face torn. Word had come even to Castle Black. Ned Stark, a man who had never broken his word, was imprisoned for treason. Killed the king, they said. Poisoned him like a coward. Jon didn't believe it. He couldn't. The man who raised him had always been quiet, stern and just. Jon could still hear his words. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. But if the sentence was silent, if the sword was poured into wine— I have to go to him, Jon said, pacing the frost-covered yard. Sam watched him nervously. You can't. You're a sworn brother of the Night's Watch now. You'd be deserting. He's my father. Sam hesitated. Then you'd die for him. Jon looked out toward the south. The wind was bitter, but something darker stirred in him, something that didn't care for vows or honor anymore. If the world was going to kill good men like Ned Stark, maybe it was time good men broke their oaths. In Riverrun, the Tullys armed themselves. In the Eyrie, Lysa Arryn trembled, afraid of her own shadows. And in King's Landing, Cersei sat beside her son, ruling from the Iron Throne in all but name. Her fingers wrapped tightly around power. But she knew the North would not stay quiet for long, and neither would Renly, or Stannis. So she summoned Tyrion. You're clever, she said. Cunning. I need you to stop the wolves before they reach the gate. Tyrion sipped his wine. And if I fail, then the boy king will be feeding. Your head to his dogs, Tyrion raised a brow. Charming. And beneath the red keep, Ned Stark waited. His beard had grown long, his skin pale. The rats no longer feared him. He heard the bells toll outside, announcing Joffrey's daily court. A child ruling with a woman's hand behind the curtain. He thought of Robert. How easy it had been. How fast. And for the first time since that night, Ned Stark felt it. Not guilt, but doubt. What if he hadn't saved the realm at all? What if he had just doomed it? The northern host moved like thunder rolling across the land. 30,000 strong, led by a boy with his father's jaw and his mother's fury. Robb Stark, barely 16, rode beneath the direwolf banner of House Stark, flanked by men twice. His age who had followed Eddard into battle and would now follow his son into fire. Each man bore a grudge, each blade, a memory. And with every mile they marched, the south felt colder. At Moat Cailin, the army paused, the ruined fortress standing like a broken gate between north and south. The marshes around it were thick and treacherous, perfect for drowning men. But Robb had no intention of drowning. He intended to burn. The Lannisters will never expect us to move this quickly, Great John Umber said, slamming a fist onto the map. They'll think we're still mustering. They won't think, Robb replied, eyes hard. They'll bleed. Catelyn watched her son quietly. He was changing. Gone was the boy who smiled in the Godswood, who played with his brothers in the snow. This Robb wore armor like skin and carried silence like a sword, but deep down she saw something else. The fear he wouldn't admit. Fear that his father was already dead. In the Riverlands, fire danced along the horizon. The Lannisters had begun their campaign early, burning villages, slaughtering small folk, and sending the Riverlords into chaos. Lord Tywin had taken the field, his armies splitting in two, one under Sir Gregor Clegane, the other under his golden son Jaime. The Kingslayer moved fast, striking deep into Tully lands. But word reached him quickly. The north was coming. Jaime smiled when he heard. Finally, he said, tossing an apple into the fire. Something worth killing. Back in King's Landing, the court had become a theatre of paranoia. Joffrey sat the throne like a boy playing with knives. He had ordered a man flogged for sneezing too loudly during court. Another had his tongue cut out for calling him my little king. Cersei watched from behind her mask of grace, but the stress gnawed at her. Sansa remained a prized captive, groomed and obedient, speaking only when spoken to. But she had changed too. Her eyes no longer searched for Robb or Arya. She had stopped asking about her father. She smiled when expected and curtsied on command. But at night, when she was alone, she whispered to herself. The North remembers. Below, in the black cells, Varys visited Ned again. "You're losing weight, my lord," the eunuch said, the faintest smirk on his lips. "Perhaps King's Landing is not to your taste." Ned didn't reply. He was thinner, greyer, but not broken. "You know this war will tear the realm apart," Varys continued. "The North rises. Stannis prepares to claim the throne, and Renly. Well, Lord Renly has charm, if not birthright." "Robert left no rightful heir," Ned said quietly. "Not by blood, perhaps. But this game is not played with truth, only with power." Ned looked up. "Is that why you helped me kill him?" Varys's smile didn't waver. "I helped the realm, not you." A long pause passed between them. Rats scurried somewhere behind the walls. "What would you have me do?" Ned asked finally. "Confess. Swear fealty to Joffrey. Lie. Save yourself, your daughters. And live as a traitor. Better a live traitor than a dead fool." That same night, Arya Stark watched from the shadows of the streets, a blade hidden under her cloak. She had escaped the Red Keep weeks ago, thanks to a butcher's boy and a girl who'd taken her place. She lived among the dregs now, dirty and forgotten. But she listened. And she learned. She learned how to move silently, how to steal, how to stab without being seen. And above all, how to wait. Someday, she would find her sister. Someday, she would see her father. Someday, she would have a list, and it would start with a name that ruled from a throne of lies. Meanwhile, far in the east, a girl with silver hair stood beneath the stars, a dragon egg in her hand. She had heard whispers of a king's death across the narrow sea. A usurper gone, a throne open, blood in the wind. Daenerys Targaryen looked to the west and whispered, "It is time." And in Winterfell, the youngest Starks watched the skies. Bran dreamed of wolves. Rickon cried in the night. And Maester Luwin's eyes lingered too long on every raven. Because winter was coming, and this time it would not wait. Robb Stark's army surged through the riverlands like a tide of steel. At the Whispering Wood, they made their first stand. Jaime Lannister's host had grown complacent, arrogant. He hadn't expected wolves to move so quickly, nor with such cunning. Robb baited him, feigned weakness, and lured him into the forest. When the ambush came, it was a bloody masterpiece. The Northerners struck in silence, shadows among trees, blades flashing in the moonlight. Arrows flew, throats were slit, and confusion turned to chaos. Grey wind tore through panicked horses, while Robb himself led the charge, his blade finding the Kingslayer's guard and knocking him from his saddle. Jaime fought like wildfire, fast, savage, unrelenting, but Robb had one thing he didn't: a cause. The heir to Winterfell slammed the pommel of his sword into Jaime's temple, dropping him cold. The Kingslayer was caged by dawn. News of Jaime's capture spread like a plague. Cersei's, controlling King's Landing, began to fray. She lashed out at the council. Sansa was struck for speaking out of turn. Even Joffrey, emboldened by blood, ordered more executions in the square just to feel like a king. Varys and Littlefinger watched quietly, each playing his own board, and then came the Raven with Ned Stark's fate. In the dark of his cell, Ned received a visit. Not from Varys, not from a Lannister, but from Sansa herself. She was thinner now, bruised beneath her eyes, her voice soft as snowfall. "Mother says the North is winning," she whispered. "They have Sir Jaime." Ned stared at her, heart breaking. You must bend, she said. Joffrey, he says if you confess, he'll let you take the black. The words made his blood freeze. The Night's Watch. A life of exile, of silence, of shame. But he looked at his daughter, frightened, alone, and still just a child. He nodded slowly. In the great sept of Baelor, under a sky as grey as ash, Lord Eddard Stark stood before the crowd. His beard hung low, his eyes sunken. The city watched, holding its breath. He began to speak. I am a traitor to the realm, he said, voice flat. I conspired against King Joffrey. I tried to usurp the throne. A gasp rippled through the masses, not because they believed it, but because they didn't. The man who had fought beside Robert, who had upheld justice with his own hand, was lying. For his family. Cersei gave the signal. Joffrey rose. Bring me his head. No, Cersei hissed. He confessed. I am the king, Joffrey screamed, and so it was. Sir Ilyn Payne raised ice, the same sword Eddard had once wielded to deliver justice, and brought it down. The crowd screamed. Sansa collapsed. Arya, hidden in the crowd, did not scream. She didn't even cry. She simply watched, with eyes of stone, as her world shattered. Robb Stark rode through the Riverlands like a storm. When the news of his father's execution reached him, he didn't speak for hours. He stood in his tent, face white with rage, knuckles bloodless. Then he summoned his bannermen. No more treaties, he said. No more bending knees. The North will never kneel again. That night the Great John roared first. King, in the North! The cry echoed one by one. The king in the North. Catelyn Stark visited Jaime's cell and looked into the eyes of the man whose family had stolen her husband's life. She wanted to kill him. Gods, she wanted to drive her, dagger into his throat and end it. But her children were still in danger. So she made a deal. You'll be freed, she said. In exchange, you'll return my daughters. Jaime just smiled. If they're still alive. Far away, Stannis Baratheon declared himself rightful king, revealing the truth of Joffrey's birth to the realm. He lit the banners of the Seven, aflame, and called upon a new god. Renly too claimed the crown, backed by a garden of roses and a host of knights who loved his smile more than his claim. 3 kings, 1 throne, and blood between every blade. Arya fled King's Landing with Yoren, disguised as a boy. She whispered names into the dark: Joffrey, Cersei, Ilyn Payne, and one day she'd come for them. Jon Snow stood atop the wall, staring south, with fire in his heart. His brothers slept, the wind howled. He had made a vow, but he was still his father's son. He turned, ready to ride, but Ghost blocked his path, and the wall stood, ancient and cold. So Jon waited. For now. In the east, Daenerys, Targaryen, stepped into the flames. She burned the past, the lies, the fear. And when the fire cleared, she rose again, unburnt, with 3 dragons at her side, and she turned her eyes to Westeros, to the throne her father had lost, to the realm that killed a Stark to protect a bastard king. The game had changed, the rules were broken, and winter was no longer just coming. It had arrived.